Hello everyone. So Sir Jim Ratcliffe has spoken for the first time as a stakeholder in Man United. He did various interviews yesterday. The one that I looked at in more detail was the Dan Roan interview. Um, my main impression is that it's really good to hear somebody who has a say on the football side of our club, who's responsible for the football side of our club, come out and be able to chat for half an hour about football, about United, and doesn't look out of his depth and is communicating ideas. And whilst he didn't give too much away, he's giving some kind of at least idea of what his plans are. For 20 years, we haven't heard anything from the owners. The Glazers are elusive, they're rude, they're aloof when anyone ever does corner them and put them in a spot where they have to answer anything about United. It's an inconvenience for them to talk about it. I think a big part of that is because they don't know what they're talking about. They're way out of the depth. They have no knowledge of football whatsoever. They make a tit of themselves every time they end up saying more than two or three sentences. And I think, to be honest, Ed Woodward was like that. Richard Arnold was probably a little bit better, but this is the first time where we've got someone who can make a meaningful difference, who can actually sit down and have a chat about football, and that came across, and that's really positive. Um, I'm by no means an Anglophile at all. One of my favourite players is Eric Cantona, who was the catalyst to United winning the first Premier League and then what followed. And that was before really foreign players were as present as they are now, certainly. So I'm by no means that you need to be from Manchester or England to be in my affection regarding United. But I do think there is something quite refreshing about an English billionaire being United's single majority shareholder. Really, he's got the biggest single stake in the club. I do quite like that, to be honest. Britain's richest man at Britain's biggest club, and he's from the area. I think that undoubtedly creates a link and an affection that wouldn't be there otherwise. And United have always been different to everybody else. Of course, I'm going to say that I supported the team and the club for a long time, but we've been pioneers. We're pioneers in Europe. We're pioneers. First English team to play in Europe. First English team to win the European Cup. Even things like the League Cup. We were the first team to start playing kids in the League Cup, and then everyone did it. We were one of the first Premier League teams to change from 4-4-2 when Van Nistelrooy came in and Scholes played in behind, and we played pretty much with one striker. United had been the first for so many different things, and I didn't want this. I didn't want 25% of Sir Jim Ratcliffe. I didn't want us to be state owned, but I wanted a full takeover, and if that meant that it was a group of Qataris that had taken it. But I can see that that's the way football's going, and to some degree, I suppose it's nice that we can book the trend. He isn't our owner, but he's a co-owner, and I think all that's good. Some things just to be cautious about are that I don't think, but Dan Roan was good. He was quite assertive in his questioning, and he pointed out Ineos have got a mixed record in football. Certainly, they've got a very mixed record in football, and they've got a mixed record in sport in general. But the difference here is everything's on a bigger scale, which means that, for example, you've got to go and get the right people. And at Nice, the pool of people you're choosing from to go and do the big jobs at the club is not going to be as skilled. Those people aren't going to be as skilled. Whereas at United, you go and pick the best. We've not done that for 20 years, or certainly since Ferguson retired. But because we are a pull, you go and get Berardi, you go and get Dan Ashworth. We do still have that pull, and with that bigger scale, it means they can make better appointments. There's a higher quality of person out there that they can go and get. So that kind of caveats the worry for me that they've not really done too well in football previously. And also, he made a good point. He said, look, at Ineos, we've got this saying that everyone can make a mistake, but you don't make the same mistake twice. And he said we've made several mistakes with other two clubs that we own, and let's hope United can benefit from that. The Glazers, he mentioned them a few times because he was asked about them. He's not going to come out and say they're a bunch of dickheads, is he? He's working with them. He's not allowed to say stuff like that, so he has to be pretty discreet about it. When he was asked questions directly about them, he was quite diplomatic as you would expect. He was quite positive about them, which will stick in some people's throats. But the only thing I had a bugbear with was that he said the Glazers had chosen him and Ineos because they thought that was the best move for the club. That's absolute nonsense. There's loads of benefits to this. There's loads of positives to this stuff that we've got on the table at the moment. I had 2 years ago, I had 1,000,000% of snap your hand off for this situation. But don't let anyone kid you that this is better than someone buying the whole club, because it's not. The fact that they're still there still gets me. I'm extremely disappointed that they're still there. But what I hope is, and what I think is probably happening, reading between the lines, is that instead of them being majority owners, I actually think what they are is majority benefactors, because they've always been absentee owners. They've always done little to nothing in terms of United, but now they are literally going to do nothing. I imagine they're going to sit there and have no say over anything that's important. That's certainly the way it seems, and you know what? That's great by me. No, I'm not happy at all that they still get to take the cream off the top. No, I'm not happy about that. But all they are is benefactors. They're not owners of the club in any meaningful way, and that has to be seen as a positive. He did also, I suppose, there was a nod of the head towards the fact of the club being so poorly run a few times. He mentioned about the fact that the manager has to go to communicate with the CEO directly with the CEO, and he said that's not something that should happen. He mentioned a few times the environment not being conducive with elite sport, with elite sportsmen. He mentioned no manager in 11 years has ever been able to work in that environment, which means the environment is what's wrong. He said about the players' attitude since they've pretty much were confirmed on Christmas Eve, it has been better. Obviously, that alludes to the fact that it wasn't very good in the first place. I was happy actually that he said that the players have put improved performances in, and he was enjoying watching it. But he also then said, because I was a bit concerned at that point, I thought, oh, here we go. This is going to be another person who then comes. We know that we need a revolution for this team, but another person then comes in and says, oh, they're doing all right now because we're on a run of form, and then there's that they get their 6th, 7th chance to make it at United. That was where I thought that was going when he started with a positive. But then he did say, as much as it's improved, it's not at the level we've got in our head of what we need it to be like. And I'm glad he said that, because that indicates hopefully that there's going to be some proper change, because it needs proper change. I go back to my 3-stage, what was the word, projection that I think is going to happen. 3 stages of what's going to happen under Ineos. And I revised it last week and said that I think 1 to 2 years is going to be damage repair. 2 to 4 years is going to be having a definable way of playing, an identity, a culture, an ethos, attractive football, winning some trophies, and hopefully if you sack a manager, it's not that big a deal, because there's a fluidity and a cohesion that runs throughout the club. And then 4 to 6 years for me would be then being the big boys, being up at the top, winning Premier Leagues, winning Champions League, has certainly been in the conversation for it, and I don't think we're going to get to that point. Sir Jim was asked, how long is this going to take? But this wasn't clarified. This part wasn't clarified. Dan Roan asked, how long is this going to take? And Sir Jim said 2 to 3 years. I don't know what the 2 to 3 years, what's going to happen in 2 to 3 years. That we're going to be winning Premier Leagues, because he also said, and he's quite right, Man United should always be in the conversation to be winning Premier Leagues and be up there in the Champions League. Always, every season. So if that's what he means, are we going to achieve that in 2 to 3 years? I think we'll be where I just said, that second stage in 2 to 3 years. I think, yeah, absolutely. That's why I've said 2 to 4 years will be when that happens. Maybe Sir Jim thinks we'll be winning Premier Leagues as well. I don't think that's going to happen. And certainly, just going back to the squad, you look at some of the. I did that video a couple of weeks ago about who I'd keep, who I'd sell, and who I'd have as a squad player. And I think I had 11 players leaving. And that didn't include Varane, Casemiro, or Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Some of the players that, by all accounts, we're going to get rid of are the players probably you need in there, in my opinion, to help us to win things. But out of that squad, if we're going to try and win a Premier League in 2 to 3 years' time, if that's what he's talking about, Sir Jim, then who in that squad is good enough to be part of the Premier League title winning squad? 2 or 3 of the players that are going to be 34 or 35 by that point, and those are the ones actually that maybe that might not be there anymore. So I don't know. I think there's a lot that needs to change in the squad before anything would convince me that this is definitely going to work. And really now it's over to Barada and Dan Ashworth. They're the people on the ground, if you like. They're the task force to go and make it happen. I'm also pleased with what he said about Dan Ashworth when he said there's no point in Dan Ashworth sat there doing nothing for 18 months. I think that indicates that hopefully there's going to be a solution to this. They will find a common ground. They will find a middle ground, and they can sort this out. Because absolutely, that would be ridiculous. If he's saying we're going to be challenging for a Premier League in 2 to 3 years, then the person he's identified to help us do that can't not be available for half of that time. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. So, a lot of it really positive. I'm interested to see what the style of play is going to be, because he mentioned, he said we will decide the style of play, as in the top of the club will decide the style of play. It will be a united way of playing, and then the manager will need to play that way. I've got no worries with that at all. I just wonder what that style of play will be, because the united way of old is, I'm not saying we can't bring it back, but that the way that we used to play back in the day is not what football's like anymore. So I'm not sure that's achievable with modern football. I'm interested with the stuff he kind of alluded to around Ten Hag when he mentioned, not in relation to a question about Ten Hag, just in relation to a general question. He said it's not as simple as just changing the coach. He wasn't even asked. He just said it's not as simple as just changing the coach. That could or could not be significant. It could mean so we're not going to do it. We're not going to change the coach. Or it could mean we are going to change the coach, but that's not going to solve all the problems. We need to have other stuff around it. You could interpret that lots of different ways, I suppose. But as I mentioned earlier, he did also say that no coach has been successful in United's environment for the last 11 years. By and large, well, listen, this is what it is. We've got no choice. This is what it is. The stuff around the stadium I've already kind of spoken about, so I'm not going to get into that. Maybe that's for another time. It is what it is. We wanted the Glazers out. In a symbolic way, they kind of are. And this is as good as it's going to get. There are loads of positives which I've outlined, and there are some things that I would be quite cautious about as well, which I've also outlined. But it's good to hear from somebody in a position like that. And he was asked about a pathway to own the club. He kind of batted that back a little bit, which I understand that. So it's good to hear from someone, as I said, and let's hope that in the next few weeks we do get Dan Ashworth confirmed, and then we start to see in reality what this new era, if we can call it that, is going to be like. It's certainly far better than it would have been. Well, we couldn't have just kept it as it was. That was never going to happen. It couldn't just be left. Anyone would be better than the Glazers, but yeah, I think I've made my point. So, as always, Glazers out.